Welcome back to a new video. In this video, we're going to look at the useReducer hook, and we're going to start in the Notion guide that is provided in the video description. So as soon as you have this open, you can go through this guide with me, and then we jump into the code. So the first thing I want to show you is what is the useReducer, of course, and what problem does the useReducer solves. In a previous video, we built a to-dos app, and we added different states for the to-dos, and we added different event listeners for when you create a new user, complete a new user, update or delete. And all of this logic is actually now sitting at the tab component, the app component of the application. But let's say, for example, that now you want to add users to your application. You want to let users be able to sign up, and you can also now create a relationship between your users and your to-dos, kind of like assign who is going to complete which to-do. So kind of like a task management application, right? If you want to now add this logic, let's say you want to write a user story and say, as a user of the to-dos app, I want to be able to create to-dos and assign users to a to-do. Cool, that's a nice feature that you can build, but now your application is going to grow. You're adding more functionality, more logic, and you're going to add more event listeners and more state all over the application. So if you want to add this, your application is no longer going to be organized in the best way as possible, because you're going to add a lot more logic. And then if we take a look at the app of how this is structured right now, you're going to see that the app component is getting very large. And now if you want to keep adding information and logic in there, is going to be not the best option. So we're going to introduce a useReducer. The useReducer is going to allow you to organize your app in a much better way, and you're going to scale and maintain your application better, because the useReducers will help you with that. So I would just want to show you really quick about the app that I was mentioning in case you didn't watch that video. If you scroll all the way down, there's going to be a link to, oh no, it's all the way at the top, sorry, it's in here. This link will open this link here, and then at the bottom you will find the completed version of the app, but I can just show you here. So this is the to-dos app, and I'm in the app component here. As you can see, we have some state to store all the to-dos. We have a use effect fetching the to-dos at when the application loads. Then we have some kind of helper function that is going to show us the alerts, and then you have a different event handlers for the CRUD operations of the application. And as you can see, you have all this logic in here. So imagine you want to add more and more features. This is going to be a really large, and of course you can export, create different files and import the functions in, but also that's not the way you want to organize everything in your application. So we're going to see the useReducer. We're going to see how it's going to help us manage our application, and then we're going to build a sample application just so we can see something separate, a quick example. And then in another video following this one, we can build a brand new application, and we can combine the useReducer hook with the use context, which when they combine together, they are the best for your application. So what is the useReducer hook? So the useReducer hook is a state management hook that is used to manage complex state logic in a more centralized and predictable way. This is why we're going to use the useReducer hook. It's going to give us a centralized and more predictable way on how your application is going to work, about the changes, everything that's happening in your application when it comes to managing your state. It's going to be in a central location where you can manage everything way better. This is an alternative to the useReducer hook, especially when dealing with state that involves multiple sub values or requires more complex updates, right? Like adding more logic. Now you're going to have a lot more things to do, a lot more things work, places where your code can go wrong. And if you have everything in a centralized place where it is more predictable of the things that's going to happen, it will be easier to debug, especially in really large applications. So in a small application, you might not need a useReducer. You can get away with just a regular use state hook. But in a really large application, this is what you're going to see, or a state management library like Redux, for example. So these are some of the benefits that the useReducer hook is going to bring in. Complex state logic is going to help you to work with that, predictable state changes, reliability and maintainability, debugging, functional updates, avoiding unnecessary re-renders, consistent API, and sharing logic as well. So you can read through this little by little, so you can get the full definition of each one of those benefits. Now I want to bring your attention to a quick diagram that I put together. And I just want to show you how this is going to, the cycle of how this is going to work now. And then we'll build an application together, and then we'll come back and see and review this really quickly. So let's say we are here at the app component, and you're going to have a button with a, there's going to be a event listener on a on-click button, event listener. And then when someone clicks on that button, is going to call a event handler function. And the event handler function, what it's going to do is going to dispatch a new action. And a new action is going to have inside an object, an action object, which is going to have two properties. It's going to have a type and it's going to have a payload. And this is where we're going to send the action type about what it needs to happen because of the click that just happened, what do we want to happen. And then in the payload, we can send any data that we need to send to a function called the reducer, which is the one that is going to update the state in a predictable way. So let's read through this really quickly so we can see an example. So we're going to start at the blue square here again, the app component. Let's say the user just click on a button that we have. So we are at this stage here. So the button event handler function, the green box here, we'll call the dispatch function. We're going to have a function called the dispatch, which is going to take in a object, which is going to be called the action object. And that object is going to have those two properties. It's going to have a type, which is going to be a string describing the type of action that is being sent, or a dispatch, and a optional payload property with if we need to send any data together with that option object, we're going to send it in that property there. So that object is going to look something similar like this. It's going to have that type property. It's going to say something that is going to describe what just happened or what action we need to take inside of the reducer. So let's say you're building a contact management app. So you can add a new contact with the click on of a button. So when we click on that button, we're going to dispatch a new action. The new action is going to be this object, which is going to have the type, and it's going to say something like add a new contact. So we're supposed to be adding something new to our state inside of the reducer function. And here we send in the information about the contact. So we're going to send an object, which is going to have all the contact information here. Right? This doesn't have to be an object, but in this case, this is an object, but the payload could be any type of data. String, numbers, arrays, anything, booleans, anything that you need to send will be sent in the payload. So then the action object will reach the reducer function. The reducer function is where we're going to have our state logic, which is going to be updating the state, and is all going to be in a central place, and you're going to be it's going to be well organized and easy to predict what's going to be the outcome of the state every time we get a new action into the reducer function. So the reducer function will receive the current state. So this is your example of the reducer function. The reducer function is just going to be a function. We're going to call it reducer. It's going to receive the current state, and it's going to receive the action object that we're sending. So this object here. Then we're going to see what type of action we need to take. We're going to see that we need to take the add new contact action, and then we're going to use the data that is being sent to update the state. And then our reducer should return a brand new state. So that way it can re-render the application. So at the beginning, it sounds very complicated because it's going to throw a few names like dispatch. Dispatch, every time you hit dispatch, just think about sending something. We're going to send this action object to the reducer function so it can make a new update. And then the action object is just going to be an action that is going to describe which action we need to take and some data if we need to send some data. Reducer, the reducer function is just going to take in the previous state, new state that is going to come in the action, new data, and is going to reduce it into a brand new state. So just think about it like that for now. We're going to go and put together a small counter app so we can see how it works, and then we'll come back and review all of the new terms that we have here. Let's now click on our link here. So we're going to open this link in a new tab. So we can copy this, open a new tab, and just paste it in there. So it's going to bring up a new code sandbox where we're going to be working on the new app. Let's click on open up the source folder, click on app.js. We can scroll this down and make some space here. And we're going to start putting the app together. So if you have any mistake, if you get any errors along the way, you're going to have the code here. We're just going to put this quick example together. And then in the next video, we're going to build something bigger like a user contacts application, contacts management application where you can update, delete all your different contacts, etc. So let's start putting this up together. So we're going to build this counter. We're going to, let's create a new folder for this one. Let's create a new folder inside the src folder. Let's create components folder here. Inside the components folder, we're going to create a new file, counter.js. And here's where we're going to create the new counter component. So we're going to create first a counter function here. And then we're going to, let's just set that one to just an arrow function like this. And we're going to return some JSX first. So let's just do a div. Let's just have something rendered to the screen first before we run into start working on the logic. Let's have an h1 here. And for the h1, we're gonna say count and close the h1. And then we're gonna have two buttons. So one button here. And this one is going to say increment. And then let's copy that one down by holding Shift Alt down. And then you can do decrement in here. Let's export default. the component at the bottom, counter, and let's bring in this component into the app component. So let's see if this can import it automatically for us. Counter, here we go. So this one added the import at the top for me. If it didn't, just import counter from components / counter. So right now we see a component be rendered here, the counter component with the word count, and then two buttons, one to increment the counter, another one to decrement the counter. So we're going to now work a little bit on the logic. We're going to bring in the useReducer hook, right? We just have a regular component at the moment. Let's import useReducer from React, and then we're going to let's initialize the reducer component. So we're going to go inside of the component and we're going to say const square brackets equals useReducer, and the useReducer is going to take in two arguments. The first argument is going to be a reducer function, which we're going to declare here at the top. So the reducer function could be in a separate file if you wanted to, but let's just create one function called reducer here, and let's just keep the function in here. So we got a reducer function, which is where we're going to run out the logic for the state changes. So reducer is going to be here. So we're going to pass this reducer function as the first parameter to the useReducer component. So reducer, and then the second parameter that this is going to take is going to be a initial state. So we need to pass in a initial state to the useReducer. So here inside of the counter component, let's just declare in a variable called initial state, and we're going to set that equals to, normally this is an object which can have many different properties in there. We're going to have a property called count for this one. We're going to initialize it to 0, right? Because our initial state, our counter is going to start from 0. So that's why we initialize the count to 0. So we need to pass in this initial state. And again, you can have multiple properties here if you wanted to. And then the initial state, we can pass it to the useReducer as the second parameter, initial state. So these are your two arguments that your useReducer is always going to be expecting. The reducer function, this function here, and the initial state. So when this gets initialized, the useReducer is going to return two values back to you, and we're going to use array destructure in here like we normally use. We're going to receive the state, and we're going to be receiving the dispatch function from the useReducer. Initial state. Here we're going to say useReducer, just so we can have some comments in here. Cool. So now we initialize the useReducer hook, and now we can pass in this state information into our JSX. So we can go into the H1, and we're going to use curly brackets, and now we can just access state.count, and then we're going to just save it, and it should run, re-render and show the current count, which is 0 because we initialize this as 0. This is the initial state. If you initialize this to like 10, That will be the initial state. And maybe we need to refresh this. So again, reload. And it will be 10. But our count is going to start at 0, so I'm going to keep it at 0. Cool. So now we have we're reading the state that is being returned from the useReducer in the H1. So now what we need is that when we click on increment, we want this button to call the dispatch function. And the dispatch function is the one that is going to receive a action object, which is going to say what type of action we need to take. Right, so now we can go to the increment here, increment button. We can listen for a on-click event. And when an on-click event happens, we want to pass in a function, anonymous function definition here, anonymous arrow function. So only when we click on it, it will call the dispatch function. And your dispatch function is going to receive an object, which is your action object. And we need to send the type. So in here, we're just going to send the type because we don't need to send any data. We're going to manage the data, the incrementing inside of the reducer function. We don't need to send any specific data because we're just going to probably increase by 1. And we don't really need to send anything. So for the type, we're going to say increment. This is the type of action we want to take, right? We want to increment the state, right? We want to increment the count. So now every time we click on this button, this is going to dispatch this new action object straight to the reducer, right? Your reducer function is already linked here with the state and the dispatch. So we're going to be receiving this action object inside of the useReducer, the reducer function here. So now we're going to go here and we're going to, your reducer function will always take the previous state. I'm just going to call it state, and then it's going to receive the action, right? This action object that we're sending, this here. Let's put a console log here. We're going to say console log, and we're going to console log the action so we can see it. Let's see if we can open up the terminal here. And then now when we click on this increment, we should be able to see that this action object is going to be dispatched to the reducer. And then we're going to receive this object here, the action object, and we're going to console log it just to see it. So let's click on console, let's click on increment. And right now we're getting a error, says reading count is undefined. Cannot read property from defined, reading count. Let's do a state that count. This is here. Let me see. Put a question mark here. And then click here again. Okay, that's fine. It's probably because we accessing it before it gets initialized. We'll come back to this in a second. But let's see. If we have, if we clear this up again, and now we click on increment, right? Don't worry if you see it 2 times, because this is your environment that is doing this, or the React application sometimes when it's in developer mode, or development mode is going to console log it like more than once, but don't worry too much about that right now. So now every time we click on increment, we're dispatching this object here to the reducer, right? And it's going to receive it here. That's it. That's everything that's happening right now. You click here, this action object will be accessed here inside of the reducer. You're also going to take in the current state, so we can also console log the state. You can call this current state or state, it's up to you. Let's put these in order, and then let's clear this up and let's click increment again. So as of now, we have undefined, and increment is going to be, type increment is the action object. So we're almost there. Let's see what else we need to do here. So we are here inside of the reducer. Now we don't have any logic. There's no state being returned. So we have to work on the logic for the useReducer in order to return a new state. Because right now we're not returning anything. That's probably why we're getting undefined, because this reducer needs to return a new state. So that's probably what we're going to work on now. Let's go right after the console logs here. And we're going to, normally a useReducer function contains a switch statement. So we're going to have a switch statement here. And we're going to switch on the action. We're going to spec the action and that type. So depending on the type, so depending on this, if it's an increment or if it's decrement, whatever action it is, we're going to perform some type of functionality here. So now we have to put in different cases. So we're going to do case increment. And normally you will see these values all uppercase, and sometimes they're even defined in a separate file and then imported into the useReducer file. But right now we're just going to put it here, and we're going to use it here hard-coded so we can see everything in one single file. So in case that is in the action that type is increment, we're going to let's do colon, and let's do some curly brackets here so we don't have any so we can see where this ends pretty easy. So we're going to return from here. So in every case we need to return a new state. So we're going to use return, and remember that your state is going to be an object with a property count with its value, right? Right now we only have 1, so we're going to just do the same. We're going to return a new object, curly brackets, count, and we're going to set that to we're going to access the state that counts, so whatever value is at the moment, and then we're going to do a plus 1. So basically we're looking at the state right now. Right now is 0, right? We're starting at the beginning. State that count is going to be 0 plus 1, that's going to be 1. So we're going to return a new object, a state object with the property count set to 1. And then that should be it for this one, for this case. Let's put a default case right after this. We can do default, and then we can do return state. So in case there is a case that doesn't match this or any other case that we define here, we just want to return the current state. And that's probably how we're going to get rid of this undefined situation we have at the moment. So let's click on increment to see what happens. So remember, when we click on the button, we're clicking on this button here. We're going to dispatch a new action object, and it's going to have its type. It's going to be increment. The dispatch is going to send this object to the reducer function. The reducer function will take in the state and this action object, and is going to look at the type of action we need to take. We're going to see that it's increment, and we're going to take the proper state to return a updated state object back to the useReducer. So let's click on increment. We got a little error here again. So we're gonna do state that count. Let's double check the code here. Let's see, we're creating the counter here. We got the initial state, current state, dispatch, useReducer. I have a typo here. Initial state, I'm missing a T here, but no, I don't think that's the issue, because I misspelled that here as well. Let's try that again. Let's clear this up. Try that again. There we go. Now it's working. So looks like that was the error I had here. A misspell here, initial state, and I think I was doing the same mistake here. So double check your spelling here just in case you did the same mistake I did. Probably not. But now we can see if we click on increment, right? We dispatch the new action. The new action is going to be, hey, go ahead and increment the counter. That's what we're saying here. It's going to go here, right? It's going to see that we're trying to increment, and it's going to run this logic. We click again, increment, increment, and it keeps incrementing. Now let's say we want to do the same for the next button, the decrement. We're going to do the same thing we did here. We're going to set a onClick, and we're going to just dispatch a new action. So we're going to call dispatch. Every time we need to update the state now, we just need to call dispatch and send this new action object. We're going to set the type. In this case, it's going to be decrement. And then we're going to save that. Now, when we click on this button, we are going to see maybe a console log. Let's see what happens. We can see this says decrement now. Decrement, decrement. That's what we dispatching now. So now we're dispatching this action type, this action object with the type decrement. So right now we don't have a case for that, but we have the default case. And if it doesn't match, it's just going to return the current state that we have. So that's why it's not breaking, but we do see the count. When we click on it, we see the count and the action type. So now let's do a case just like this for the decrement. So we're going to do case, and we're going to do decrement. And here we normally create kind of like a variable in a separate file, and I'll probably do that in the next app, because you can make a typo here, you can make a typo here, and then the case may, they might not match or something. So this also, this another way to introduce kind of like a little bug in here if we don't be careful. So let's do the case decrement, and let's do a return. And then we're going to just do the same, return a new object. Now the count is going to be state that count -1. And we're pretty much doing the same thing, but now we're decrementing. And that's it, we're done. We're done with the reducer, we're done with the dispatch, use reducer hook in general. So in this simple counter application, if we click decrement, it should decrement the counter and increment the counter if we need to. All right, so that's it for this one. I just want to keep it short. I want to go back to this here, and I want to bring your attention again back to the diagram, right? This diagram is showing you again. This will be your counter app. On the click of a button, we call the event handler function, which is the one we define here, right? This function here. And then we're going to dispatch the new action with the object, and that object will be sent to the reducer. The reducer will have all the logic to update the state. The new state will be returned, and the app will re-render. So I hope you like this video. Check out my next video where we're going to put together the useReducer hook with the use context, where you're going to see all the power that those two bring together. So I'll see you in the next one. Don't forget to like the video to see if you're liking these videos, and let me know in the comments as well. See you in the next one.